Oh, is everything still working?
ずいぶんと前に亡くなった祖母は旅が好きだった。見知らぬ景色、見知らぬ人々、見知らぬ者との出会いが大好きで、高い天井で育てば背が伸びるというように、世界を広く持つことが人を大きくするのだと。
Hello.
そして高校2年の夏
Vector has
休
to
み、
work late tonight.
私も遠くへ旅に出る。部活の合宿な
Good
のだ
luck,
けれど、
Vector. I hope
こ
that
れ
you
も
get
旅には
enough
違いない。
rest. And Miyaugana, I'm glad that you
電
are
車と
here.
車を乗り継いで、
Yes, yes.
私たちは南
I
の
will
海へ。
share
剣
the
と
chocolate
道着を
chip
カバン
cookies
に
that I
詰めて、
made. Although I will have to
鬼ヶ島を
protect
望む
Miyaugana from them.
岬の山門へ。
They are full of pecans.
そこで私が出会うのは、
The Haps
我が目を
is
支える内女の子。
we are
旅
starting.
先で
Can
知
you
る
hear
新た
me?
な
Are my
顔
levels
も
all
出会いと
right?
いえば
I've
出会
had
いなのか
to
も。
I've had to adjust a lot of
相座は
things
休み。
because the
ここよりさらに
lesbians.
南
Well,
か
the
ら来た
lesbians are
目的不明の先住者。ちょっと苦手かもしれない。キアン右は神よの剣を携えて神ます島へと向かう国威の剣気。
Let me turn
Kaya.
that down a little bit. Get
サ
that
ラの
balance.
木に咲く白の中、ひときわ異彩に
Yeah, get that balance down a little bit. I think that
Tsubaki
might be a little bit better.
紅白。そして
Yeah. I think
私が
that
たどり着い
balance
た夜、
looks good.
互いに惹かれ合うよう
Alright.
に
And
波に
then
運ばれやってきた
let's
少女。
also go ahead
Nami.
and
投げ入れられた6つの小石、波紋が重なり綾をなし、まだ見ぬ絵巻を織り上げる
Alright.
月の満ち欠け。
Well, I have my guide up from 2008.
定めの恵み。
I'm going to continue following the guide from 2008. I have let the opening play out one time for old time's sake. I don't know how much longer the game is going to take because I have never played the Grand Route. I think that well, so two things to mention.
昔々のお話です。
Remember that we did not play the Kaya route or the Nami route on stream. And what ended up happening, of course, is I spent most of those skipping through and just skimming. That easily would have been like another 6 weeks on both of them. They're pretty substantial routes, especially if we didn't go right in for the ending that we needed right away. And so no surprise that I could not have gotten to the Grand Route back in 2008. Even with the guides, I simply did not have the time. So this game, I feel like could easily run you 80 to 100 hours, which is a lot longer. A devastating amount of content, and so much of it feels so inconsequential. I do enjoy some of the conversations, but it is a whole lot to get through. So, one last time, we are going to go through Aoi Sensei's intro, and we are going to skip a lot of the segments that we have read before, which will probably actually get us to about day 3, but then things are going to diverge a bit. So hopefully we will see the start of the Grand Route tonight, and I don't know how long it will take. I doubt that we will finish tonight. It's possible we could finish next week. It's possible we might not finish for 3 or 4 weeks, but I will be putting 2008 to rest before the new year. 2008. Your days are numbered.
今から2100年ほど昔、南の端っこの方に浮かんだ島を半島経由でやってきた鬼の一団が口押しや。さほど大きな島ではないが、イザナギの御事とイザナミの御事が生みたもうた我らが新州、我らが領土。
Yes, yes, we must escape from 2008. Yes, so I can also catch anyone up if you're not clear on the state of relationships or anything of the characters, but it's not super important. I don't think I'll explain if anything comes up. The important part is, of course, like 3 different people are Yasuhime, kind of.
ただでさえ島の周りには早く複雑な潮流があり、
There again, the ship's tides bore into the ship's bottoms.
航海上の難所だったという。
You have to protect your bottoms from the tide like that.
暴風雨まで加わっては決まったものではありません。まさに鬼に金棒、領主率いる征伐軍は手も足も出せなくなってしまいました。さらには弱り目にかかり目なのか、それとも鬼の反撃なのか。 至る所で疫病が流行り始め、それは全土に蔓延しました。疫病といえば飢饉もセットでついてくる。地震、台風、干ばつと並ぶ特級災害イベントです。もはや鬼退治どころではありません。それから続くは妊婦の押し付き。ようやく事態が好転するのはなんと2年も経ってから。観覧神父の果てに人口が半分ほどに減った頃、 時の大君が姫に龍神様がお告げを下したのです。お告げ通りの方法で龍神様を祀ると、疫病はパタリと収まりました。とりあえずは一段落といったところですが、まだ問題は解決していません。相変わらず島は鬼の一団に占拠されたままで、その大将が呼ぶ嵐のせいで島に近づくことすらままならない状態なのです。 姫は連日連夜我が身を削って一心不乱に祈り続けました。龍神様に御願い立てまつります。どうか病を治めたように鬼ヶ島を守る嵐の海を沈めてください。
Seems like the music is also louder than. I wonder why.
BGM の音量調節よ。 SE の音量調節よ。ボイスの音量と詳細が設定できるわ。 BGM の音量調節よ。 設定はあなたのボイス再生中は BGM の音量。
Oh, yeah, there's simply an option for turning down the music. Why?
BGM の音量を下げるようにもできるわよ。
I do wonder why in this HD remaster they've decided not to default the option to lowering the music when a speaker is talking. But I mean, I guess that's. You can also we can silence specific characters if we want to. If there's any character you just never want to hear again, we can silence them. As punishment for their crimes, I imagine. Well, silence all men. Yes, yes. We can in fact do that. The thing is that I suspect that the Grand Route probably won't have too much of the men other than maybe Monkey Ukai. I mean, Baroryu is probably gonna be in here at some point, I guess, but he's so minimally relevant considering that he only shows up in a couple of the routes and he eats shit every time. He mostly exists to make Munetsugu look like less of an awful dad by contrast. He's still a pretty awful dad.
飛来する将軍の矢にごろりと転がる鎮眼祈願を掴んでは投げ掴んでは投げ、見事にこれを撃ち落とす。矢が尽きるが先か突き立つが先か、両者一歩たりとも相手に譲らぬ五分の勝負も、やがては白くと偏りを見せ、とうとう軍配が翻る。一射にして二死、工夫を凝らした将軍の矢が飛び、不つり突き立つ鬼王の目。いたやいたや、己よくも潰れたひなりの眼を抑え、残った右の瞳をたぎらせ、呪いの言葉を吐く鬼王。飛び散る赤い血しぶきが黒く腐って正気を発し、雲下のごとく湧いた正気は光を遮る容器となって鬼王の体を包み隠す。このままでは済まさぬぞ、このままでは済まさぬぞ。地鳴りのごとき叫びに負けじと、容器は大きく膨れ上がり、膨れて密度を疎にした容器を清めの風が払うと、そこには闇の黒よりなお暗い。
Yes, yes, fare thee well, drive safely.
小山ほどある化け物牛は虎のものにも似た怖い瞳を濁った黄色に光らせ、尖った大きな角を振り立て、斧があだへと地を蹴りました。波の武者であったなら、それを間近に見ただけで歯の根を鳴らして足をすくませ、立ち往生を遂げたでしょう。ところがどっこい大将軍とて波のものではありません。主従4人で敵地へ乗り込む肝の太さの持ち主であり、見合った武勇の持ち主なのです。おじけず素早く弓を引き、一子二子三子とつがえる端から矢を追いかけます。狙いはたがわず、放つや思った箇所に当たるのですが、手傷を負わせた様子もないまま矢筒は空になりました。さてはと悟る大将軍、こやつはただの鬼にあらず、我が大君が尊き神の血を引く秋津神であるのと同じに、王たるこやつもただの鬼にあらず、古き血を引く悪しき神だ。ならば道理は知れている。人の弓には傷つかぬ神であろうと、神の剣の前には傷つき倒れるのが道理というもの。突進してくる牛型の鬼をひらり真横にかわしざま、手にした弓を投げ捨てる大将軍。代わりにその手にひらめかせたのは、立つ神よ渡つ神よ、我に力を与えたまえ。新たかなる霊剣を解く示し、鬼王の首をは跳ねさせたまえ。走る刃、風をなぐ音、ふつと断ち切る確かな手応え、ごとり転がる牛の首。こうして王を失った鬼たちは、雲の子を散らすように逃げ出したり、降伏して人の王に恭順を示したりするようになり、鬼ヶ島は取り返されたのでした。めでたしめでたし。
And for the last time, that is the intro to the game. That is the thing what did this whole curse upon me in 2008. Because that intro, I think, is like it's a pretty strong intro, pretty nice folklore, pretty nice music. But we're going to skip ahead because we've seen this part countless times. We know all about Shoko and her class coming in to Urashima and Unosaka for their Kendo Club summer training, and we've done all the other endings. We've unlocked all of the seals. We are finally ready. Now, we didn't fill out every single part of the flowchart because I simply do not have the time to unlock all of the CGs from the bad ends. Even skipping forward, that takes up a lot of time. So we've gotten every happy end though, so we can tour all of those CGs afterwards if we want. But I've never played the Grand Route, and this is going to be my first experience of it. So to finally put the ghost of 2008 to rest, and to watch this opening sequence for the last time, here we go. Alright. Now the grand route won't diverge from the other routes for a little bit. The problem with that, of course, is that means that we've got a lot of content to get through to get to the actual grand route. I think that the entire first day, in fact, is almost identical to... I think it's almost identical to the Nami and Kaya routes, or maybe the Nami and Kohaku routes. I am having a sense of deja vu. Yes, we're having a sense of deja vu. And then, of course, after having this sense of deja vu, we need to learn a little bit about Yasumi's family. So we have to go and help her out in the kitchen when that comes up in a moment. Alright. And of course, we have to ask her the question in the kitchen. We have to ask, do you have any other family? Because, of course, as we know, so Yasumi's whole deal is that she's like, yes, I just live with my mom, and it's just us. But actually, she is the daughter of Nikata Munetsugu, who is the priest of the Nikata line that guards that ancient, mysterious shrine in the ocean. And her older sister is Nami, who is actually the girl who looks like Yasumi in the flashbacks with Shoko. But she was, of course, like, given the secret medicine that makes her stop aging and also kind of makes her into a vessel for Yasuhime and all of these other convoluted things. Yeah. So, Yasumi, you got any other family? Normal family? Yes. And now, though, we have to go and do some Nami route choices. Which means that at some point during the night, we've got to go and figure out where Nami is, and then once we find her, we have to rush to her. So, sorry, Yasumi. We're going to help this young girl. And this is pretty much the same as the Nami route, which I don't think people here have seen, so this is where we are going to pick up. I ran towards the girl as if shot. Sometimes a doll would wash ashore and cause a sensation, but this was surely not the case. Even from far away, the detailed form didn't look quite human. So I thought it could have been a doll, but that left me with a contradiction. The feel of sand beneath me gradually became harder as I reached sand that had been moistened by water. A large splash, a huge spray of salt water. I didn't have time to worry about my shoes, which would soon be wet and soaked. Taking up water, I kneeled next to the girl and lifted her soaked body halfway. Yasumi? Hi? My shout caused Yasumi to stop zoning out and blinked. Yasumi, she recovered her normal senses as a manager. The sand caught Yasumi's heel as she turned and hurried towards the temple. Her hair and her thin clothing were filled with water, and when I held her, my t-shirt got soaked. The moonlit ocean looked out of place since it was so cold. The girl's body was like water, and since they were both the same temperature, a living body didn't feel like this. When we found her, she was already... Or was she already... This wasn't good, but I had to be realistic. It's weird, but I didn't get a creepy feeling like I was holding a corpse. I calmed down, and to confirm my doubts, I tried to see whether she was breathing or not. I put my ear next to her mouth. Her lips against my earlobes were cold, but... I could confirm that she was lightly breathing. As if answering me, she breathed in. This time I could hear her breathe without my ear being right next to her. The night air melted into blue. The girl breathed in deeply as if drawing essence from the moon. I I could see her lips move and her long eyelashes fluttered. Her stiff movements were really like those of a doll, or like a newly born foal trying to stand for the first time. But even still, slowly, her eyelids fluttered upwards. From beneath apparently heavy eyelashes, she opened her eyes. From the shadows of her eyes, the color blue like the water's surface appeared. They were perfectly clear like jasper. If she looked at me, I might change my mind and continue thinking she was really a doll. But what appeared from the blue shadows was deeper than the fog in a dream. Those lapis lazuli eyes drew me in. I swallowed my breath as our eyes met. As if drowsy, she needed time before she could give a response. It was only for a moment, but I saw an expression. For an instant, she smiled. When her eyes started to close, the binding spell on me vanished. With no chance to respond, she once again fell into an abyss of sleep. But this sleep was clearly different from the previous.
このお嬢さんは大した運気の持ち主ですな。
確かに。私も休みも出てなかったら朝まであのまま海の中だったでしょうし。
The beach was along a running path, so she'd probably be seen in the morning. Though it was the middle of summer, to stay soaked all night in the ocean, I'm not sure she would have been okay. It'd definitely be more taxing than lying on her futon here. And there's the possibility that the waves might have dragged her back into the sea, where she'd disappear.
それが決め手の一点ですな。こうしてこのお嬢さんが保護されたのはいくつもの幸運が折り重なった結果じゃろうが、寛容なのはもう一点。おそらくは最大限の運をそこで必要としたはずじゃ。
最大限の運。
The monk nodded as he fingered his beard.
この辺りの海はじゃな、泳いだり流されたりするには向いておらんというか、そうするには大層危険がつきまとうんじゃ。
What would happen if you'd been dragged into the ocean?
それというのもこの近海は地形自体が複雑な上、奇岩解析がゴロゴロしておる。かような場所に潮が流れ込むものじゃから。
早く複雑な潮流がありです。
It seems analogous to the wind swirling around tall buildings. Excluding the part about complicated changes in flow, it might be easiest to imagine it as a hose connected to a pipe. If you squeeze the tip of the hose, the strength of the flow can change greatly.
上にこの辺りに流れ着く恵比寿様は決まってものすごいありさまに化けておられる。
恵比寿様とは商売繁盛の？確かに漁の途中で拾って帰ると大量になるとか言われてたりするけど、ここで言う恵比寿様は水死体のことなのね。まあ
何せ船底に穴を開ける凶器のような岩も多い。人の皮膚などざっくり切れるし、強く当たれば目も当てられん。まさに船板一枚下は地獄というわけですな。
怪人様である九郎様への信仰が根強いのもそういう地域性あってのことなのね。海危ないんですね。
ああ、残念です。
残念って何が？
私泳ぎにはちょこっとばかり自信あるんですけど、やめた方がいいかもしれません。せっかく水着も持ってきたのにな。
まあまあまあ、お嬢さん、せいてはことを仕損じる。諦めなければ終わりではない。
お嬢さん。
なに、危険なのは岩場のあたりじゃ。遠浅の砂浜から外れずに足のつく範囲で遊ぶ分にはそうそう危険なことはないじゃろ。
うわー、水着復活。ももちゃん調子いいんだから。
とりあえず岩場の方には近づかぬことですな。ましてや鬼の踏み石などは言わずもがな。
鬼の踏み石？
そう呼ばれておる場所があるんじゃ。昔話の将軍がサンバガラスのお供を連れて 鬼ヶ島に奇襲を仕掛けたくだりは知っておるかな。奇襲というからには見つからんように島へ近づく必要があったわけじゃが、
ある時期のある時刻に島との間に秘密の道が現れるのです。
鬼の踏み石こそが昔話の秘密の道というわけじゃな。踏み石という名前から想像できるように、普段は波をかぶっておる岩が大潮の干潮になると顔を見せるようになるんじゃ。
つまり地続きになるわけですか？
わあ、それなら飛び石ぴょんぴょん飛んで島まで渡っていけるわけですか？
ぴょんぴょん。
いけんことはないが行かぬがよろしい。いやいや、むしろ行ってはいかん。わしがこの名を挙げたのは危険な場所の例としてじゃ。それに踏み石渡りは宗教上の都合で禁止されておる、いわゆる禁足地というやつじゃな。
It wasn't the case for Unasaka, but it wasn't a religious precept of Urashima. Besides the Oni stepping stones, it seemed that Urashima also had other places where only special people were allowed to set foot.
その昔、ナムやら何やらをどかどか作っておった時代のことなんじゃが、そのような場所であれば当時もさほど難しくなかろうと、海を埋め立て道路を渡す計画が持ち上がったことがあるんじゃ。もちろん費用は国持ちでじゃ。
車で行き来できるようになったら島の人も楽ですよね。
The distance to the island was around 5 kilometers. Even with a bike, not a car, it'd be quick to reach the other side. It'd be more convenient than using ferries that only cross over a certain number of times each day.
ところが島の住民は猛反対じゃ。よって話は立ち消えとなり今に至る。と話がそれてしもうたが。
He cleared his throat in preparation and said,
この辺りの海は少々荒れてる時に投げ出されたら終わりというぐらい危険なところなんじゃよ。ところがじゃ。
The monk's gaze returned to the sleeping girl.
そのお嬢ちゃんを見てみなされ。
True, from what I could see, her white, smooth skin didn't have a mark on it and continued down to her
だ
fingertips.
とすると
We had to consider the possibility that she didn't wash up from the ocean at all. I hadn't seen footprints in the sand, but even Yasumi and my footprints would have been washed away given time. Or, just like the monk said, maybe she was very lucky and had washed up without any injuries.
はいはい、この子の様子も落ち着いてるし、少し様子を見るってことであなたたちももう寝なさい。
うん、それが良いじゃろ。
We returned to our rooms after their remarks.
おやすみなさい。
はい、おやすみなさい。
Flickering and swaying. It's like I'm looking at an image underneath water. A different world wavers, and it causes a distortion far away. At a place like this, no matter how much you concentrate, you wouldn't be able to see clearly. What was that scene? What image is at the bottom? An image from a faraway, different world, a piece of a distant memory. A memory lying in the depths of my mind. I couldn't remember even if I tried. It was quietly sleeping deep within me. I'd forgotten, and this past scene might wither along with me at the end of my days. And that was now. It's now. The water which calls me. The castle gate at the water's bottom opens, and I was swallowed by the rapids of the past. I was in the middle of a forest. I was in the middle of the forest chasing after someone I didn't recognize. In an unknown place in an unknown forest, my younger self was led by a small girl. Flowers were blooming around us. Red flowers were blooming. 1, 2, 3. Countless. In the middle of the forest, countless crimson flowers were blooming around us. To the young me, they were nothing more than pretty red flowers. Looking around now, I innocently said, "Wow, pretty," as I gazed upon them. But to the me that watched this scene now, those red flowers were Tsubaki. They greatly resembled the summer Tsubaki. Like the character spring contained in the word, those red flowers announced the coming of the season. But my childhood self was wearing a thin shirt and shorts. The young girl in front of me was wearing summer rather than spring clothes to match the season. Is this a memory, then? I wonder if it's a memory. Or was it a jumble of various people and places and seasons from my other memories all mixed together? The memory turned to bubbles, floated upwards to the surface, and disappeared. Before I'd found any answers, the dream was ending. My surroundings crumbled, and I was enveloped by the bubbles of my dream. And I floated up towards the surface of the water, towards the bright surface. The moment I broke that surface, the dream turned to bubbles and disappeared. I felt sunlight on my eyelids waking me from my deep slumber. I woke up. Even without an alarm clock, I wake up at around the same time every day. It's something that others praised. As a precaution, I set the cell phone alarm, but right now, it was well before it would ring. All right, and now we get to fast forward to several other choices. So we, of course, hear the ghost story. So let's see. We need to go and check on the girl from last night. Out of the suspicion that maybe she's the ghost. It's true that she felt different from a normal person, but it wasn't an eerie feeling like that of a ghost story. But if she really wasn't human, a Yuki Onna hides itself as an icicle, and the little mermaid disappeared into bubbles. Like a vision of the blue kingdom beneath the waves called forth by moonlight, it would soon disappear. Would that girl also disappear at the same time as when the spell dissipates at dawn? That thought made me uneasy. I knew it was just an idiotic, groundless fear, but I couldn't leave it be. In the room where the girl was placed, Sensei was in her usual mode of dress. And also, the girl was still there. When we're at our normal place, Yasumi accompanies us on her bicycle. We didn't bring it with us. Even if we borrowed one, riding on sand would be harder than running and impossible for Yasumi. The reason I came rushing here wasn't because of Ayashiro and Yasumi's conditions. It was because of a worry I couldn't normally happen, but that was too embarrassing for me to admit.
絶対にとは言えないけれど。やっぱり関係ないか。ここで寝ている体はね。桜井さんが見たのが本物の幽霊なら、この子である可能性は捨てきれないと思わない？もしかしたら脱婚してる最中なのかも。脱婚？魂が抜ける、生き量とか幽体離脱とか聞いたことない？抜けやすい子が稀にいるのよ。寝てる間に無意識にとか。ドキュメントじゃないけど、源氏物語の六条の見やすどころとかがその典型的な例え話よね。その場合の葵の上と違って綾代が恨まれる筋合いはないと思うんですけど。
Sensei looked like she had a carefree thought of, ah, we share the same name.
それはまあそうなんだけど、恨みつらみ以外の原因だったりするかもしれないし、手とか足とかの部分特定だけど、自分の体を探して回る幽霊の怪談話は多いじゃない？見失った体を探して一人一人、とりわけ髪の長い子の体を改めて回っていたとしたら、桜井さんの髪は群を抜いて長いし、相沢さんも結んでるのをほどくと結構長いわよね。やめてくださいよ。朝からそんな怪談話。はいはい、わかりました。
It was bad luck.
それで幼いさん、長話になっちゃったけど時間の方は大丈夫？ほらほら、部長さんが遅れたら指名し。
Yes, and now we go running. It's interesting to me that that bit of that exchange there is something that you see on Nami's route, and you also see it here on the Grand route. And it's an exchange that hints at the reveals from Yasumi's route. However, you have to play all the way through Yasumi's route before you can get into a lot of the locks in Nami's route. So you would only really see that as something foreshadowing a reveal in Yasumi's route if you tried to go down Nami's route before you went there and hit a dead end and then had to go back. So right here we're going to have Yasumi help out. And in doing this, we see that stretching scene again. And we are then, of course, going to see Last Night's Girl as our next choice, which is checking in again on Nami. But we won't have to do that for a little while. So we're going to stay here with Nami. Momoko was able to scamper away with all her might when it was this hot under the blazing sun. I looked at the all-too-pale face of the sleeping girl. Maybe it was because I hadn't slept well last night. I wasn't doing anything special, just sitting in the room where the wind blew past, but it caused me to feel sluggish and sleepy. I flopped down next to the futon where the girl slept. The faraway roar of the sea and the cool feel of the tatami mats enticed me to sleep. I closed my eyelids and furthermore. A dream. Was this a dream? Or was this a continuation of the dream I saw this morning? There was something indeterminate fluttering inside me. That vague something headed towards something else glowing in the color lapis lazuli, swimming through the ocean. When I woke up from my dream, our eyes met. As I got up from lying on my side, eyes the color of lapis lazuli followed me. And they kept staring at me. Maybe she didn't blink a lot because she was using all of her might to stare at me. I didn't see any movement beside her occasional blinking. Of course, if I looked closely along with gentle breathing, her chest and shoulders are moving up and down, but she really did give the impression of being a doll. As if my voice were a switch, she blinked naturally 2 or 3 times and gave a slight smile. which caused her to change from being a doll. And this time it was as if my switch were cut, as my body and mind wouldn't work. From the futon, her hand slowly emerged and touched my face. It was a little different than a casual gesture, and I was greatly flustered as she kept petting me for some reason, though I didn't have any right to complain since I'd also touched her face without asking. It was hard to deal with a person who had weak reactions like this. Though her lips moved slightly, the sigh that escaped couldn't be called a voice. But for some reason I knew that she was repeating my name. Acknowledging that, she relaxed into a happy expression. It was like how a flower bud blossomed, and I was transfixed for a while. When I recovered, I got embarrassed by what I was thinking and became uneasy. Asking a question which would have an obvious answer, the girl looked at me and nodded. I was relieved that this girl, who didn't look Japanese and gave a non-human impression, understood Japanese perfectly, though she was a little clumsy, as if she were a child that had just woken up. I took hold of the hand that was patting my face and put it near hers. Fascinating too, because we learn in Nami's route, but we also learn in other routes. We learned in I think in Kohaku's route as well, and in Kaya's route, but of course we didn't see that on stream. That her name is Tsunami, so calling her Nami all along just worked out completely fine. That reminded me of how she gave the impression of a mermaid last night. As I recall, there was a children's story about a little mermaid who exchanged her beautiful voice for a pair of human legs. The little mermaid rescued a human prince from a storm and fell in love with him at first sight. In order to be with that prince, she offered a sacrifice to the sea witch and came up to the surface. No. Or was it that she wanted a soul like a human, something that a mermaid didn't possess? And then the little mermaid, who was no longer a mermaid, was found by the prince. If that were the case, since I found this child, my role would be... Those embarrassing words leaked from my lips, and I flustered, tried to use my hands to cover my mouth. But once it got out, I couldn't put the lid back on it again. Since it was impossible to do that, I could at least try to hide my blushing face a little. I used my comparatively cool hand to act like a coolant against my burning head and cheeks. Shoko, why are you acting like this, talking to a child who just woke up? I let out the heat trapped within my body along with a sigh. It was excessive to think that this child would give up her family and voice just to come be with me. Though it was true that this was the very sea where I had drowned in the past and had been miraculously saved. I had asked a question, but it was basically to myself, though the girl still looked up at me sincerely. At the next instant, a mysterious sound rang out, causing her to look down at her own stomach. Maybe I didn't communicate that well enough. I repeated the question as I rubbed my own stomach. The girl copied my actions as she stared and rubbed her own stomach in time. The answer didn't come from her lips, but from the honest response of her belly. I wondered if my questions and the conditions of her body meshed at all. She nodded once. One person had continued complaining at lunch of somen, but it all got consumed somehow. There were still noodles left, but since they'd have to be boiled anyways.
おかゆとかがいいかもね。ちょっと待ってて。作ってきてあげるから。
Patting her on the head, she seemed happy and nodded. Satisfied by that reaction, I prepared to leave the room and go make the meal. Looking back at the noise behind me, the girl had moved from the futon aside and was about to get up. She nodded. She kept shaking her head. Her small white hand clenched and grabbed onto the hem of my shirt. Her expression didn't change much, but her eyes were saying not to leave her behind. Well, no choice. There's no helping it, I guess. We've got to take her along. I lent her a hand and tried to help her stand. Her movements were awkward, like a newborn foal trying to use its legs for the first time. At that movement, the door slid open. The person who came to check up on her was the master of the temple. The girl looked a little shocked when she caught sight of the monk. The monk eloquently talked about the girl and gave a broad smile when he saw her large, round, surprised eyes. Having entered the room, the monk reached out his hand towards the girl's head. It was a non-threatening gesture, but with a more than 40-centimeter difference in height, the difference in volume was too much for her. There was no mistaking that large, powerful hand was enough to make a child cry if they saw it coming towards them. I didn't think she'd cry, but perhaps she would at least hide behind me. That's what I thought, but it seemed she was, somehow, a gutsy kid. She just might not have a sense of danger, but looking into her deep azure eyes, she seemed to regard the monk as harmless. Going along with the hand that patted her on the head, she shook her tiny head back and forth. Perhaps I, as an onlooker, was more uneasy than she herself. She shook her head. I showed him my sleeve, which the girl wouldn't let go of. It might not be because it was me. Anyone would be uneasy if they found themselves in an unfamiliar place. Thinking like that made me a little sad, but then it wouldn't really matter if I watched over her or not. Fortunately, this child didn't seem to be afraid of the monk. The monk wouldn't accept no for an answer and walked back into the hall. As he was about to close the door, he remembered something. It's what you'd expect from someone in charge of parishioners. In contrast to his large body, he paid attention to fine details well. The single-layer kimono was like yukata and could be used in place of pajamas, but we couldn't leave her forever like this. If she were a little bigger, she might have been able to use my clothes, but even Momoko's clothes were probably too big for her. Sensei was also with them, so they shouldn't have any problems with paying for it. I wondered if Unasaka also had retail stores where the prices weren't too bad. The girl looked with interest at the cell phone I took out. She smiled at me with a child's inquisitive look of, "What's that?" which made me want to explain. The cell phone abruptly rang, startling her and causing her to flinch. Geez, I guess I really did have bad luck or bad timing or something. The girl looked cautiously at me, but smiled as she realized that it didn't seem to be dangerous, and I checked to see who was calling.
綾代から
I guess I was pretty self-serving too, since I withdrew my complaint about the bad timing after seeing who was on the other end.
もしもし綾代ちょうどよかった
ちょうどよかった
I conjured up an image of Aoi Shiro with a befuddled look on her face.
ちょっと買い物頼もうと思ってね
何か注文し忘れたものでもありましたか
私のものじゃないんだけど今さっきね昨日の子が目を覚ましたのよ
昨日の
At times like this, it was inconvenient not to be able to call her by name. If it were to continue like this, I thought we should at least give her a temporary name or a pet name or something.
無事に目を覚ましたんですね
綾代
Though she said she was glad, I felt there was something else behind that tone in her voice. That's right, Aoi Shiro was the one who called
そ
me.
っち何かあったの
ついさっきのことなんですけどやすみちゃんが急に気分を悪くして
休みが
朝は調子悪そうだったけど昼は元気そうに見えたから
Aoi Shiro herself had been feeling bad, so since she'd felt okay, she judged that it wouldn't be any
痩せ
problem.
我慢とかさせてた
I could hear Aoi Shiro's indistinct voice past the mouthpiece. She'd covered with the palm of her hand as she talked to someone else.
そんなことないんだそうですよ
休みもそこに
はい後部座席で楽にしてもらっています
The back seat. If I strained my ears, I could hear the faint sounds of a moving car.
今こっちに帰ってる最中
冷房の効いた店内と暑い外とを出入りしたのがいけなかったのかもしれません
そうねにしてもこっちのことは入れ違いか
I wondered if this was the perfect time for the phrase, "It stands up over there, it won't stand up over here," which I, Runa, don't understand whatsoever. I assume that this is an idiom that got translated very directly.
綾代は大丈夫なの
私は全然
Her tone of voice was like she was being apologetic for feeling well, but that shouldn't have been the case. The worst case would have been for both of them to feel bad, and that'd be enough to give even Sensei a stomachache, perhaps.
それで翔子さんの用事というのは
うんこっちに戻ってる途中なら別にいいわ
As I used one hand to fend off the girl who reached with curiosity towards the phone, I decided to let Yasumi rest, first and foremost. This child didn't seem to mind the clothes she was wearing at present.
あ先生には安全運転するように
I ended the call.
さてあなたの服はどうしようかしらね
She fumbled with the phone, which no longer had voices coming from it, and I patted her on the head as I pondered.
服がどうかしたかね
おしょ早かったですね
Since he came back in the span of a phone call, I was a little uneasy that the rice wasn't boiled enough and was still hard inside. I decided to taste the food first by saying I was testing the temperature as an excuse, but it seems like the monk saw right through me.
余ったおにぎりを煮直しただけの即席のおかゆですまんが
余ってましたっけ
わしのおやつにと取り置きしてもらった分があったんじゃよ
Ah, I could readily accept that reasoning.
それで服がどうかしたかね
この子の着替えどうしようかって
I took the tray with the earthen pot from the monk. As I set up the meal, I summarized what had happened for him. Lifting up the cover, the sweet smell of rice wafted into the air. Though I'd eaten a proper lunch, even my appetite was whetted. One would want to eat cool items in the summer, though it seems that the smell that arose with steam was particular to hot foods.
マネージャーさんもさい
あの子は体弱いからほら暑いから気をつけて
Because she was urging me to go faster, I used a wooden spoon to scoop up a spoonful of the okayu for the young girl. She snapped it down in one mouthful.
だから暑いって言ったでしょ
I gently patted the young girl's back as she coughed, causing her face to turn red and her eyes to fill with tears.
仕方ないわね
You could say the benefit of being a cute kid was that after getting a feel of that slim, helpless back, anyone would want to help out. That is a strange line to include That's just a strange line to include, I think. A benefit of being a child is that when someone touches your back, they'll want to help you. Alright. The thing that's particularly... The thing that I did not care for in Nami's route, and one of the reasons why we didn't play through it on the stream, is that Nami is, like, actually older than Shoko. I think by, like, a year or two. She was a year or two older than Shoko when they met. She's a year or two older than Shoko now. But, of course, because things were done, you know, sort of like magical, fantastical, legendary medicine type things, her body stopped aging at a certain point, and she's basically kind of like 11 to 12 years old or something like that, like some 10 to 12, which already itself is like, all right, I've read enough Yuri, I've seen enough anime, I know what angle they're going for here, but they write her as even younger than that, right? Like, they're clearly writing Nami as if she's like 4 years old sometimes. I pursed my lips and blew on the spoonful of okayu. Repeating that for a while, I judged it to be cool enough and used the tip of my tongue to confirm its temperature. It was better to be careful since you could be scalded, but I made sure that a well-seasoned okayu wasn't too hot or too cold. The taste was also rather good, and I resisted eating it myself as I stuck out the spoon towards the girl. She cocked her head to the side as if asking why she should do that. Since she just ate it herself, she didn't have to give much of such a mysterious look. I acted like I was feeding a child, and I made a noise along with opening my own mouth, indicating that she should copy me. The young girl opened her mouth, and I inserted the wooden spoon into it. She closed her mouth in surprise, but fortunately I was able to extract the spoon and leave only the okayu in her mouth. Perhaps she was wondering when the pain would spread to her tongue as she fearfully opened her eyes. Instead, it seemed she enjoyed the savory taste of okayu, and her eyes shone and her mouth started moving. She swallowed, which gently went down her thin throat and into her body. Then she opened her empty mouth, indicating that she wanted more. I was relieved, since normally the monk was alone at the temple, so I didn't know what to do if we didn't have any clothes that would fit her. For Eastern clothes, like the undershirt she was currently wearing, we'd be able to adjust a little. It seems this was a genuine kimono that needed help, needed someone to help her put on. It's true that looking at the low end, there were kids who stopped taking baths with their fathers at the age of 10. I'm not thrilled about the conversations that we're having in this game right now. It's true that I felt some mysterious connection to her. Last night, it was not only a coincidence that I was at the ocean. This child must have summoned me there. Like the monk said, we would have to leave Unasaka in a couple days, since we were only transitory guests. However, we should first take care of the contents of this earthen pot. When the contents of the pots cooled and could be eaten normally, the monk returned with the kimono. I had mentally prepared myself, since it was a kimono that would need my help to put on, but I didn't think that it'd be this extravagant. Although it was covered by a curtain and not spread out, I could tell the design and luster. It was an excellent item. Even flowers could be put to practical use, but what was the monk thinking in letting an unknown girl wear such a kimono? Maybe it's like in a drama where the kimono is a memento of a daughter or a granddaughter, and this child reminded him of her, or... That didn't seem to be the case here, though. I removed the white undergarment she had been using as pajamas, wiped her body with a wet towel, and prepared to dress her. The young girl offered no resistance as I stuck my arms between hers and lifted her. She stood obediently. I gently let go of my hands, and she didn't fall down, but rather stood up straight. Her hazy eyes looked my way as she cocked her small head to the side. It seemed that she understood my words, but perhaps I hadn't been able to convey the small details. The young girl tilted her head to the side in a cute gesture as if asking, "Like this?" as she copied what I'd shown her. I'd been into kendo ever since I was small, so I didn't play with more girly toys and hadn't had a single doll to play dress-up with. But I did remember having fun decorating the doll stand of Akiko-san's, which she said was an item from her marriage. Dressing up the beautiful young girl in front of me in an extravagant kimono was enjoyable enough to make me break into a smile. Without even a knock, Momoko suddenly slid the door open, and I was in panic as I was still on my knees dressing the girl in front of me. No, if it were a sliding door, she couldn't knock, but I wished that she'd at least call out and wait for a reply before entering. Though she might be a bit more unrestrained since we went to an all-girls school which was extended to the dorms. I knew full well that if I went along with Momoko's rapid change in moves and pace, I'd be in trouble. I didn't relax the hand that was dressing the girl and replied in a nonchalant way to Momoko's reasonable question. I tied the sash and used the palm of my hand to pat everything to make it smooth, finishing up. I looked at the young girl's back and then held her shoulders while having her make a complete turn. Since her arms were slightly apart, the lovely long sleeves fluttered as she did that. The red goldfish on the wave pattern undulated. She seemed happy and smiled a little, which also caused me to break into a grin. Though at first I'd wanted to change this child into something simpler that wouldn't cause a problem if it got dirty. But since the monk, the creator himself, said it was okay for her to wear this, I didn't have any excuse not to use it. I think it'd actually be ruder to refuse since the monk worked on it all night. Am I the asshole for refusing the extremely extravagant kimono that a monk worked on all night without asking anyone if he should make this? It is very lovely, though. I mean, it's because the character designers wanted to give her the pretty kimono and give her that, like, very traditional look. It's true that being able to put on one's uniform didn't have quite as high of a standard as, and high a reputation as tea ceremony, flower arranging, or dance. It's said that a child is raised, how a child is raised is more important than its lineage, and the influence of how a parent raises a child is significant. Important. I kept hearing her say she was from the countryside, but I wondered just how rural it was. Was Momoko from Hinamizawa? Apologies. Perhaps she had guessed what I had been thinking since she had also
着
smiled.
物の着付け教えてほしいなら教えるけど、あ、でも綾代の方がうまいか。
姫先輩なら納得です。
It's not like I didn't understand her feelings, but hearing her say that right in front of me felt somehow a little rude. There was a message from Ayashiro as well.
そういえば桃子、買い物中に休みが。みんな、ただいま。
It's like the saying, when you're talking about someone, that person just happens to be nearby.
うわ、肉ありますか？肉。
Momoka headed to the front entrance after giving a cry like a wild animal.
いやだから肉の前にや。
I chased after Momoko. The young girl chased after me, dragging the train of her kimono. We let Yasumi, who was carried back to the temple, rest on the girl's futon, which was already laid out, so they'd changed places. It seems her complexion was better than when she'd first collapsed, but the color of her skin was still pale as wax. I gently reached my hand out to brush the bangs from her forehead.
ザワッチがこの案外じゃ肝試しは延期ですね。せっかくした準備に精を出してきたんですが。
まったく何をやっているんだか。
The young girl who stuck close behind me peered with great interest at Yasumi's sleeping face. She reached out her small white hand and patted Yasumi's face, like what she'd done with me earlier. That was a sign she was waking up. Her eyelashes fluttered and a sweet husky sigh escaped from her nose. Whether it was because her consciousness was being drawn back from a dream or not, Yasumi frowned. Her eyelids slowly opened. At that instant, I felt as if a loose gear within me had clinched into place. And a moment later, she gave a startled cry and the gear returned to its former position. As the young girl reached her small white hands towards Yasumi's face, it caused Yasumi's drowsy eyes to snap wide open.
あれ？この子は？お？その声、ザワッチ気がつきました？ちょうどザワッチと入れ替わりで目が覚めたんだって。
Yasumi sat up. The girl wanted to continue patting her on the head, causing Yasumi to give a troubled smile.
ほらほら、ザワッチ困ってるから、おさわりタイムはおしまいおしまい。
Osawari time.
チェ、可愛い子は毒ですよね。私もザワッチ撫でまくりたかった。
休み気分はどう？
今はそんなに。
ところで休み、さっきこの子を見て何か言ってなかった？確かナミ。
The young girl turned to look at me.
確かに着物の柄は波模様ですけど。
だけど休み、この子の顔見て言ってたわよね。
Her face turned red as she realized we'd heard her talking in her sleep. She looked down and peered through the gaps in her bangs.
髪の毛が波みたいだなって。あ、私もそういう印象を抱きました。
The uncommon length of her pale, luxurious hair gently fluttered as she moved. The colorless platinum hair glittered in the light as if it really were silver waves. The monk might have picked a kimono with a wave pattern because he had that same impression of her. Her small mouth moved up and down as if asking, "What is it?" That's right, we should make the decision right now.
いつまでも名前がないと不自由だから、この子のことはナミって呼ぶことにするから。ナミちゃんです。
The girl also reacted to Ayashiro's voice.
その子も不満はないみたいですね。ナミちゃん。
Looking towards Yasumi, who called her name, the girl, Nami, relaxed her round eyes and smiled.
それで翔子さん、 ナミちゃんのこと何か分かりました？
和尚がいろいろ聞いて回ってくれたみたいなんだけどね。せめて本当の名前だけでも分かったならもう少し探しようがあるんだけど。
It's Nakata Tsunami. It won't make searching very easy.
休み？体調まだ悪そう。
And now we know that the reason for Yasumi's reaction there is because she might know at this point,
いえ、もう大丈夫です。
or at least be thinking about her older sister.
それに晩ご飯の準備とかしないと。
You would think that having played so much Aoi Shiro, I could accurately answer questions about, you know, when a character might have known something, but no, not really. The flowchart and timelines they're all quite tangled. I stopped Yasumi as he started to get out of the
そっ
futon.
ち私がやっとくから。
でも
訂正私と綾代でやっとくから。
どの材料が今夜の分で。
Since Ayashiro also went shopping, she probably asked for details about Yasumi was going to cook tonight. Because Ayashiro went together with her, she might be willing to let Ayashiro handle this. Yasumi realized that she didn't really have to make it herself.
はい。
She nodded and hid half her face under the futon again.
そういうことだからあなたはそのまま休んでなさい。
Ayashiro and I entered the kitchen. As we did some prep work, the sun outside lost its bright white color and started turning yellow and then to red. Because of the sun shining through the window, the items in the kitchen lost their color as well, but in its place, it felt warm. In the city where the sunlight didn't reach the ground, I relied on electricity and forgotten that dusk looked like this. The world looked burned with warm colors, like a faded old photo causing one to reminisce or feel nostalgic. And not just about what had happened today, even about events further back, things that happened long ago. Now that I think about it, I think the last time Ayashiro and I were in a kitchen together was at the last training camp.
さて何からすればいい？
今日のメニューは決まってますから。
I asked for orders from Ayashiro, who seemed to be confirming the kitchen tools and arranging the order of events in her head.
玉ねぎ刻んでくれますか？
みじんに？
お箸で食べやすい程度にスライスっぽい感じでざっくりと。
了解。
I knelt down to get the onions from the bag on the floor, which put me at the same height as Nami, who was watching my every move. After waking up, Nami tagged along right beside me and hadn't left my side once. I wondered about bringing her to the kitchen, a place with knives and fire, but everyone else was busy with cleaning and such. Even Aoi-sensei wasn't free because she was directing the cleaning, since both Ayashiro and I were cooking. In that case, I felt it was better to bring her along where I could keep an eye on her than have her wandering about.
ナミも手伝いたい。
She nodded. Beside the saying, those who don't work don't eat, if there was something that she could do, I think it was probably good to let her try.
じゃあ私の真似して皮を剥いてね。
I peeled the onion until the inner white portion showed. It was an easy task that could be done just by hand, so it'd be hard to fail, and even if one failed, it wouldn't really cause any problems. Nami didn't have very skillful hands, but she still put her heart into peeling the onion. Finally, the reddish-brown skin fell off, revealing the shiny white bulb. Nami stared at it with her round eyes. She was originally a child who didn't show much emotion. Still, her eyebrows knitted together, and her expression changed from solemn to... Praising her seemed to fill her with confidence as her eyes and lips relaxed. She was as cute as a flowering bud.
ありがとう。
I took the peeled onion from Nami and deposited it into the colander in the
よ
sink.
くできました。
Her eyes thinned as I patted her on the head. Repeating those steps countless times, we managed to amass quite a lot of peeled, pearly gray
こ
onions.
の先は包丁使うからおとなしくしといてね。
I moved Nami behind me. Holding a knife that glistened in the sunlight of dusk, I prepared to take on the shining white onions. I leaned my upper body over the cutting board. As expected of a knife from the monk who formerly did kendo, it was sharp and made a nice sound against the cutting board. Nami peered over and looked with interest at the sliced onions.
そんな風に顔近づけると痛い目見るわよ。まあ多少は経験か。
ちょっとかわいそうな気もしますけど。
If you cool down onions and slice carefully, you can avoid it to some degree, but some onion juice will still spread. With the distance between my hands and face, it most likely wouldn't get in my eyes, but... However, Nami originally had large eyes to begin with, and since she did put her face so close to the onions, staring at them from such a distance, the result was expected. Nami rubbed her eyes as tears started to pour down them.
言わんこっちゃない。ちょっと待ってて。
After I put the knife down and washed up, I stretched my arms out to Nami, who was wiping her tears with the sleeves of her kimono. Though the falling tears were pretty, they were still only drops of water.
僕当たり前に普通の涙ね。普通ではな。人魚の涙は真珠になるって聞いたことない？
翔子さんはナミちゃんのこと本気で人魚姫だと思っていたんですか？
いや、本気で思ってたわけじゃ。
At this point, I think it's turning out to be both a kind of a boon that we skipped Nami's route earlier, because so far this hasn't really diverged from it at all. I shut my mouth after saying that.
意外とロマンチストなんですよね。
まさか。
My face heated up as I blushed. I wanted to use the palm of my hand to cover my face, but my arms were full since they were wrapped around Nami at the moment. The rolling steam coming from the large pot raised the hot summer temperature. My face might also feel that way because of it.
ちょっと暑いわね。
I gave a big sigh, letting out some steam. With Nami's low body temperature, I felt as if the heat was being lowered as I patted her on the head.
そういえば翔子さん、そういう話は休みちゃんが詳しいと思うんですけど。
In fact, actually, comparing it... Yeah, the Grand Route is identical to Nami's route until the second choice of day 3. And even after that, it doesn't seem to fully diverge until day 4. Or maybe, no, about the middle end of day 3. So, even though we did skip Nami's route, we're still kind of getting the early parts of Nami's route. Whether it was out of pity for a fellow girl or a fellow warrior, she continued talking as if nothing happened.
真珠じゃなくて琥珀なんかも人魚の涙と呼ばれているそうですよ。
琥珀って樹脂の化石よね。虫とかいろいろ入ってたりするし、山の宝石なんじゃないの？
そういえばそうですけど、ヨーロッパの方では海の宝石らしいですよ。
I wondered if it was also used in the Mermaid Palace, like the coral, seashells, and pearls mentioned in Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales.
流れ着くか。
Perhaps this child was also like amber. Sometimes items from the mountains were found in the ocean. It's worth noting here also, amber, of course, kohaku. After I determined that Nami had calmed down, I returned to slicing the onions. Nami hid behind me as if trying to maintain her distance from them.
にしても、まさかこんなことも知らないなんてね。
玉ねぎを切ると目にしみるです。
見た感じ通りの年齢ならわからないことはないと思うんだけど。
Even a kid who didn't know how to cook should have gathered that information from various media or from other
で
sources.
すけど、経験で身につくことには個人差がありますから。
It seems that recently a grown woman who had been using a cleansing agent to wash rice had even appeared on a variety show. That's not necessarily recent, Shoko. I've literally seen anime as far back as the early 80s make jokes about that. I think it's actually been like, it's kind of like a stock modern era joke that, oh, look at that silly woman who's so foolish she has washed rice with detergent or like dish soap rather than just with water.
さまざまなことが経験に基づくというのでしたら、その経験を蓄積している記憶が欠けている
記憶が？
ナミちゃんがどこかで溺れてここに流れ着いたのだとしたら。
ああ、確かに。
I've heard of that before. I'd heard that I myself might be a case like that. There was a possibility of damaging the memory if the brain doesn't get oxygen for long enough. And surely at some point, at some place, something like that had also happened to me. Sinking deeply in fragments of that summer. Piling on top of each other, I sank into a deep blue world. The redness spread. The redness was my... No.
翔子さん、どうしました？
いや、ちょっと考え事して。
I looked at the finger that I had cut with the knife. I was really careless to be thinking about something else while using a knife. After a brief moment, blood started welling from where my finger was slashed.
切っちゃった。
大丈夫ですか？
And though it wasn't her finger that was cut, Ayashiro's brow knitted into a painful expression as she worried over me.
平気平気。悪いけど、絆創膏とかもらってきてもらえる？
Looking at Nami, who was stuck fast at my waist, Ayashiro smiled.
確かに翔子さんが行くより私が取ってきた方が早そうですね。
お寺の廊下やら畳に血の跡垂らして歩くのも罰当たりな気がするし。
わかりました。すぐに戻ってきますね。
I lifted the injury higher up than my heart. Basic first aid treatment as Nami tugged on my sleeve. Perhaps Nami wanted to see the injury at her eye level as she tugged my arm down. The blood flowing from my wound went past my finger and down to my wrist, drawing a red line to my elbow. A crimson flower bloomed on Nami's white finger.
その高そうな着物、汚したらまずいからちょっと離れてて。
Nami obediently let go, and, well, I think we all know where this is going. Then she licked the substance off her finger.
ナミ。
I was frozen by the scene in front of me. During that moment, Nami grabbed my arm. Drip. A crimson drop trickled from my finger. Drip. Before the second drop fell on the floor, Nami extended her tongue to catch it. She was already shorter than most people, and still her hot breath tickled my finger. My wound was stimulated, causing it to twinge. Okay. The moment after I became conscious of that pain, along with the throbbing pulse of my blood vessels, the nerves gathered at the tip of my finger. The entire human body, in the entire human body, the fingertips were had the most acute sensation of touch. I don't know if that's true. Even if it was a swollen fingertip that felt feverish and hurt. No, maybe because of that, I perceived hot and moist air wrapped around my finger. I mean, to be fair, I've heard the thing over and over that, like, your fingertips have, like, the most nerve endings, or that they're the most sensitive to touch. I just don't necessarily know if that's accurate, or if that's just anecdotal stuff that's been repeated over and over again. But I've heard it constantly. I mean, it's definitely very, very painful when you hurt your fingertips. And we are resetting the counter. It was the wet sigh coming out of her small mouth. I am going to skip this scene. I can summarize what happens for you all. We have to say, don't stop Nami. Essentially, Nami just sucks on Shoko's fingertips, and she gets, unreasonably excited by it. And it's kind of just an awkward scene because it's just a little bit silly and abrupt. And then Ayashiro and Yasumi come in and are like, "Oh my god, Nami, what are you doing?" I looked at where the gazes of Yasumi and Ayashiro intersected. Nami was still holding onto my finger. She continued to suck on my finger like a baby sucking milk or an infant who couldn't stop sucking on their own fingers. After blinking her long eyelashes twice and then thrice, her dazed, foggy eyes shone with intelligence once again. She just got vampire hypnotized, drinking blood. The water from the tap robbed the heat of Nami's lips and tongue from my finger. After wiping my finger off with a paper towel, I wrapped a band-aid around it before the blood started oozing again. Yasumi looking very irritated there. Her hair flowed as she shook her head back and forth, resisting my suggestion. Though I couldn't clearly understand her intentions, I couldn't just let her do whatever she liked. I wondered why Yasumi's voice sounded so cold. It's because she's feeling jealous suddenly that someone else was sucking on Shoko's fingers. I blushed. And we're skipping dinner again. The dinner scene is largely the same as that which we have seen many times. We are going to skip this scene as quickly as we can as well. I said skip this scene as quickly as we can. Holy shit, why is it now not deciding to skip? Okay, come on. We're skipping that. We are going to sleep with Nami. Sleeping beside Nami. This route does not do that. Yeah, in fact, I don't think there's actually any sex in this game whatsoever. They just describe drinking blood very sexually, but there's actually, in fact, barely even kissing in this game. Which is the other thing that I think might startle some people, is that, you know, like, obviously the game has all of the, like, content tags you'd expect from a game with H scenes, but no. Success did not make an H game here. In fact, they barely made a PG-13 game in a lot of ways. Yeah. Covering my yawn with my left hand, I stuck my head out through the sliding door into the next room. Sitting next to Yasumi, Momoko had a strange expression on her face as she jabbed Yasumi with her elbow. This dream again. In a forest where red tsubaki flowered, a young me was holding hands and walking with a young someone else. Was this someone some vision created from a dream, or was this a buried memory? This had to be a dream. Something that happened before, though. In the past, I'd come with Natsune-san to Unasaka, and then I had seen the Tokisaki no Tsubaki forest. That was my voice. Did I say something like that to this child? This child. This child was... I couldn't stay down there and was forcibly pulled up from the abyss of my dream. Like a deep sea diver who wanted to take a breath, I let out those words. I woke up from my dream while still holding onto the image of that girl. Unlike yesterday's soundless vision, my voice could be heard in the one today. Though it seems we were discussing something, the reason her voice wasn't heard might be because the images of her speaking were missing as well. The girl I met in the Tokusaki no Tsubaki forest. The film rewound. Replay, stop, and rewind. Replay, stop, and rewind. Replay, stop, and rewind. Replay, stop, and rewind. I went over the memory again and again until it looked about to wear out, trying to obtain the maximum amount of information I could from it. My words were eaten up by that noise. I couldn't hear what I said, but I could confirm the movement of my own lips. There were 2 syllables. One where the mouth was open and one where the mouth was closed with the teeth slightly showing. I overlapped this image with the unedited one in my short-term memory that had just resolved. I figured out that the vowels were ah and eh. Or maybe e. I'm not sure exactly which phonetic style they were writing in, but it's e. Because she's talking about tsunami. Okay. E. I linked up the image with the sound and the one without, trying to recover those lost words. The words babbled up from without me and spilled out of my mouth. That couldn't be true. Everyone had a different rate of growth, but the child in the dream looked about the same age as me. The undulating, shaking noise I heard coming from outside made me uneasy and scattered my concentration. That sound was neither that of the waves, the wind, or even that of a car engine. It resembled the low roar of a beast. The noise I heard coming from the ocean came from the direction of Urashima.
災いの元凶が鬼王の怨念が生んだ牛の形に似たる鬼。
To prevent this from happening again, she sealed him in a holy Tsubaki tree that she planted and gave her own power. Then the sound that I heard was... This was a noise that indicated that we were nearing that time. It was said that the reason for Kurosama's festival was in order to suppress this roar. It sort of resembled the sound heard in movies or dramas of a trumpet blowing to indicate the start of a battle. Strangely, I felt as if I'd heard it before. When? Where? I should remember, but I couldn't recall. I wondered if this sound was the same as the one missing from my dreams of that summer. After going outside, the low, eerie noise was even louder. The wind blew violently, and looking up at the sky, the clouds moved at a rather rapid pace. Like a dragon racing through the sky, they moved as they pleased, and they covered up part of the moon for a second. Oh, forgive me. They covered up part of the moon for a second, casting a shadow on the ground below, and then moved on as if nothing had happened. There had been no sign of them the other day. I wondered if they were preparing for Kurosama's festival. The moon might be magical. On a night like this, it would not be strange for something to appear, or more like something would appear. Something soft and cold wrapped around my finger, and the next instant my shoulders jumped. Nami, who tugged at my hand, didn't have any strange look about her face as she quietly looked up at me. Nami, dressed in pajamas, gave a strong impression of white, appearing with a faint presence like that was bad for my heart. Nami, who couldn't speak, probably couldn't call out to me, and so this was a pointless conversation. I lightly squeezed our connected hands once, as if in reply Nami squeezed in return. There were no gaps where we were holding hands. The wind couldn't enter and it felt warm. Nami didn't nod or shake her head, but continued to stare up at me. Her calm, mysterious eyes glittered blue in the moonlight, unlike the dazed look they had at noon. She was almost like a different person.
Nami? えちょっと、Nami?
Nami gave a sigh as if she wanted to say something, and then headed towards the temple gate, still holding my hand. My feet didn't resist and let her lead the way. The white flowers, which only lasted for a day, were blown upwards from the slope of the hill and danced high in the sky above us. As if giving her new life, the white flowers reveled in the sky. Holding the pale young girl's hand, I slowly proceeded through them. That transitory, fantastical scene acted like a primer and drew out the vision of my dream from deep within me. For a second, my field of vision was colored the same as the blood pumped out by my heart, and the white flowers became dyed in red.
Nami-chan?
In a forest where red tsubaki flowered, I followed after a young girl who held my hand. The scene of my dream mixed with my visual hallucinations. The sound of my heartbeat, of the blood rushing, buzzed in my ear and was irritating. My body should be on solid ground, but my consciousness was rushed around my body by the circulating blood. Until my broken consciousness was reassembled, I couldn't think and I wasn't aware of the outside world. And when I realized that, the buzzing sound of my blood had changed into the rushing of waves. It was the sound of waves which held purifying salt. I heard the sound of them coming from an ocean lit by cold moonlight. The redness that clung to the back of my eyelids was washed clean by the blue waves. My feet stopped. Beneath them was the feel of sand. I suddenly realized we were standing on the beach.
ゆうべここであなたを見つけたのよね。
Only 24 hours had passed since then. I didn't feel that we had only known each other for such a short time, though. Perhaps we
あ
had.
なたは一体誰なの？あなたは一体どこから来たの？
Nami continued to stare at the ocean. At the end of her gaze was the ocean reflecting the moonlight in the dark shadow of Urashima. The Sala forest was here, the Sala forest where white flowers bloomed. And there was only one tree, the Tokusaki no Tsubaki, which had red flowers. The Tokusaki no Tsubaki forest, where red flowers bloomed all over, was...
私は浦島に行ったことがある。浦島で女の子と遊んだことがある。その子の名前は何？
The color of the hair, eyes, age. I felt everything was different, but still, even though that was the case.
あなたがそうなの？何の音？
It wasn't the sound of waves breaking. I heard the sound of something wet splashing nearby.
魚が跳ねたなんて可愛い音じゃないわね。
I wondered if someone was there. Perhaps someone was taking a walk like Yasumi and I had yesterday.
誰かいるの？
Even if someone was there, why was it the sound of splashing I heard? I felt the noise was coming from the direction of the rocks nearby. We're going to go find out. I might have imagined it, but Nami also looked in the direction of the sound. It wasn't that she was following my gaze. In other words, the noise wasn't an auditory hallucination, and there really was something over there. Was someone drowning? No way. At a place like this? At a time like this? However, something more unbelievable had already happened once the night before.
足元気をつけて。
Nami nodded as I held her hand. This time I went first as we headed towards the rocks. The tide, which had just been full, was in the middle of receding, and perhaps that was why the rocks near the seashore were still wet. If we got close to the ocean, we might even slip from here. Now we could clearly hear the sound, which was even closer than before, and this was no hallucination. What was that? I swallowed my cry and used my free hand to cover my mouth. We were still a little distance away. At the rocks was something not human. It was small in stature. Its head probably only came up to my waist, and since its back was curved into a forward posture, its true height was probably a little taller, but it was still shorter than Nami. At a glance, it looked like a monkey, but I didn't know of any living creature that resembled that. Looking at the shadow from far away, it had a large face not fitting its body, with two protrusions on top that stuck up like horns. Oni. I didn't know whether it was an Oni or not, but it wasn't human at least. That grating cry was like that of a sea lion in an aquarium, or perhaps the raucous call of a crow. Perhaps summoned by that voice, other similar monsters appeared around us. For now, they only appeared at a location far away, but what if they started coming nearby?
Nami, 逃げるわよ.
Once Nami's murmur reached my ear, I took her hand and started to leave. I was grateful that Nami wasn't the type of child to put up a fuss. This time the sound of splashing was closer.
こっちにも.
This time they weren't a far-off shadow. The protrusions that looked like horn turned out to be long ears. The reddish-black skin was smooth and had neither scales nor hair. It strangely resembled human skin, which felt revolting. No, perhaps it more closely resembled the skin of an amphibian, such as a frog or a newt. Their ears stretched out long like a rabbit's. Its large mouth looked like it could chomp mine or Nami's head whole, and it contained saw-like teeth.
Nami!
I pulled Nami back and ran far, far from this place. While doing so, my foot slipped. I somehow managed not to fall down, but while trying to keep my footing, my bare legs grazed the rock. I didn't have time to check on the wound. I could move without any problems, and we'd still leave the first aid for when we got back. Still, even though I just grazed my leg and it was just a shallow wound, thinking about it made me shiver. I see. Like the monk said, the rocks around here were rather dangerous.
Nami, お寺まで戻ればきっと大丈夫だから、それまで頑張って.
Perhaps it was due to the impact of running, because she didn't nod, but shook her head to the side. We couldn't stop, though.
もうすぐ砂浜だから.
Concentrating with all our might, we climbed to the temple gate. Looking down the stairs, it didn't seem like any of the creatures had followed us, though. I pulled Nami close and hugged her tightly. Nami's low body temperature felt good against my hot, feverish body.
おやおや、こんなところで合いびき？
右は。
部屋の中だと他の部員の目もあるしね。
そんなのじゃないわよ。
私は別に気にしないから、そっちも気にせず続け。まったく。
As I separated from Nami, she looked up at me with a mysterious gaze.
そういうあなたこそ。
見てわからんものは聞いてもわからん。
She shook the long pole encased in a bag that she held in one hand. In her opposite hand was a commonly seen basket.
わざわざ夜釣り？釣れないのに?
It seems she'd been talking to Momoko about it this morning. It's quite a long time to be out from late evening until we return from morning in the run.
アホは寝て待て。あんまり簡単に釣れるとありがたみなんてないわけです。本命だけなら釣れてほしいけど、雑魚の相手は鬱陶しいし、釣れすぎるのも問題なのよ。じゃ、私はそろそろ。
待って、岩場の方が釣り場なら。
なんで
It was a natural question to ask, but without thinking, I shut up. Logically speaking, it was too absurd, and if I told her, she'd just laugh it off. But if I didn't tell Mikiwan the next morning she didn't return, or even if she did return but wasn't okay, even if I was reluctant to do so, I had to tell her.
化け物？
猿みたいな。
Anyways, they had caused me to escape with Nami to a safe place. It was something we'd been forced into. That had been our top priority since I'd acknowledged they were dangerous and I hadn't bothered with the smaller details. Now that the desperate situation was over and I had to explain it, I didn't even know their real identity.
もしかしてあれ。
They didn't have a plate on their head, but their hands were webbed, and They had other characteristics similar to Kappa. Since Migiwa had talked to us about it, she might even believe me. By Migiwa's reaction, though, it seemed she'd deliberately been suppressing her laughter until I was done.
おさってば意外と怖いの。私がカッパの話なんか幽霊の正体見たり大方岩に砕けた波しぶきとかいくらなんでも亀とじゃあ長の脳内で組み替えられた他人昨日も階段登るとき回想シーンに
It's true that at times an unexpected event can trigger past memories that should have been forgotten, but that incident now wasn't like that, was it? As a kid, it's true I might have mistaken a spray of water or a piece of newspaper flying for a monster. Maybe it was still true. Still, even if you said that. I'd completely forgotten, but I had been injured. I was not a drunk person who wouldn't even notice a serious injury due to alcohol. An injury like that would have woken me right up. The injury on my leg that I'd received on the rocks as I grabbed Nami to get her to move was... I didn't see the injury at all. Perhaps Nami had also scraped herself since she was looking at her hand. Migiwa's hard gaze fell to her. At Migiwa's voice, Nami looked up, shocked. Migiwa looked at the surprised Nami with a smile, but her eyes didn't give off the same. Did her eyes really give off the same light as earlier beneath that thin gaze? Truthfully, it was frightening. Since it was Nami, of course, she couldn't say anything.
長の話を信じることにするなら、そいつらはカッパというより正体不明の毛量あたり。毛量？地味毛量の毛量よ。山の貝と海の貝に二分した場合、地味の方が山の貝。毛量の方が海の貝。ご名答。まあ、化け物って言ってるのと大して違いはないんだけど、気分として。そういうわけで、どうなっても知らない。そいつはせっかくだから何か
Migiwa puffed out her chest full of confidence. Though I was worried for her, I also thought she was being an idiot. I wondered if the basis for my worry was just an absurd vision I experienced.
今夜も坊主に朝ごはん全部賭けの対象変わってるしその状況
Did she not have confidence in her fishing? If she was so bad at it, then did she simply like fishing that much? Still, was all of that really just a dream? And that's where we'll leave for tonight. As well, actually, let's get up to the next choice, because this is a pretty simple scene that leads us pretty much exactly in the same place as we were in last time. We're going to wait and see, because we've got to go to the Grand Route, and once I save here, come on. Once I save here, we should be thoroughly in the Grand Route next time. We've got day 3, we've got day 4, and we've got all of day 5. So probably 1, 2, I'm suspecting probably 2 more sessions, but maybe 3. And hopefully before the end of the year we will be completely done with Aoi Shiro. Thank you all for sticking with us. It has truly been a marathon pace. For all the good and bad that we've endured, I think the biggest thing that comes away from Aoi Shiro is that there is simply so much of it. There is just a whole lot of it to get through. And I think that's what I'm feeling most at this point in the journey with it. So hopefully we will be very close at the end of next session. And it will just be two more streams until the end of Aoi Shiro. and we will reach the happy end of the grand route, which so far has just been identical to Nami's route. So we shall see how that goes, and for now, good night, everyone.